How often have we used the words unprecedented and Donald Trump in the same sentence? Far too many to count, of course. But the way his campaign has been publicly rapped over the knuckles by the US Army this week over an altercation in Arlington Cemetery might have sunk many previous candidates. Trump, as we know, though, is different, unique, his supporters would say. All that said, Kamala Harris had a good convention, and her coach trip through the key swing state of Georgia this week continues to attract attention, as does her lead in some recent polls. But can it last? Welcome to another edition of Talking Politics USA. Hello, so that's a wrap on this year's convention. Since our last episode, Kamala Harris has cleared her first major hurdle on the long march to November the 5th, delivering the most important speech of her life in front of a very receptive Democratic Party.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. But America, we are not going back. We are not going back.
Both the Republican and Democratic conventions generated hours and hours of round-the-clock coverage, which was watched by tens of millions of viewers. But after all of it, the polls are still close. And now comes the real jeopardy for both Harris and Trump: the interviews, the head-to-head debates, and keeping up the positive headlines. It's already a difficult day of headlines for the Trump campaign, thanks to a row breaking out about a potentially rule-breaking visit to Arlington Cemetery. Our correspondent Rachel Townsend is joining us to discuss that. And we're also joined, of course, by Adam Hodge, who's worked in both the Obama and Biden administrations, and the former Trump administration advisor Heather Nauert. Our two experts who will be with us right up to election night. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Rachel, can I start with you? Can we talk about this, what happened in Arlington Cemetery, and equally important, what didn't happen? Let's do a new listener's start here, shall we, on this story. What's it about, and how have we come to this point?
Yeah, indeed. And we should also discuss, the big problems this could cause for Trump. So basically, Trump was at the memorial on Monday at Arlington Cemetery to honour 13 US military members who were killed during the US withdrawal in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Now, this turned contentious when the former president's campaign staff got into a bit of an altercation with cemetery staff over filming at the burial site. And just to put this into some kind of context, now, Arlington is hallowed turf. It's not somewhere, we can just wander on. We need permission. We need permission in writing. JFK is buried there. So it is sacred to people, I think we can say, and people take it very seriously. And this altercation is a big error. What has happened this morning is that we have heard for the first time from the Army. They have issued a statement about this alleged altercation. Let me read a little bit to you. It says this incident was unfortunate, and it is also unfortunate that the ANC employee and her professionalism has been unfairly attacked. So the families there were happy for him to be there. He got permission from the cemetery to be there on the proviso that he didn't turn this into a campaign event. There is a photo that has emerged of the former president appearing to show him with his thumbs up at Arlington Cemetery. This has been interpreted by many as using this as a photo call, the exact thing that he was asked not to do. And that is now where he is coming under fire. His running mate Vance spoke about this yesterday, said this is all being hyped up by the media, and the media trying to turn this, trying to sort of say that Trump turned this into a photo shoot. Now, that is exactly what some people are saying he did do. We are about to leave to go do some filming at Arlington. And now a lot of vets hang out there, and it will be fascinating fascinating to hear their take on things, because, you know, historically he has a lot of support from the vets, and this is why it could be so problematic in the weeks ahead.
Okay, well, Rachel, I know I need to let you go to Newsgather, but thank you very much for giving us that summary. Let me put that to you, Heather and Adam. Heather, maybe start with you. Does this matter? Will it impact Trump in any way? We've so often seen him do things that would have been terminal for other candidates, and it doesn't seem to have any impact on him at all.
No, I really don't think it'll hurt the former president. In fact, many members of the military tend to love him. He was invited there by the families of the fallen. Let's remember that President Trump is the one person who brought them all on stage, or many of them on stage, at the Republican National Committee. President Trump is not responsible for the deaths of those 13 fallen. President Biden is. If there's any outrage to be placed anywhere, it should be our disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, leaving $82 billion worth of equipment behind to fall in the hands of not just enemies, but also adversaries, including countries like China and others who could reverse engineer all that equipment. And then, of course, the most tragic part was 13 of our service members dying. President Trump was invited by those family members. I don't know what happened with regard to the video. I think it's unfortunate if a member of the staff there was pushed. I think that would be totally inappropriate, but I haven't seen the video. I haven't seen it myself, but I do not think it'll hurt President Trump. In fact, I think Democrats in the media should be very careful about overhyping a situation and trying to miss and put the blame on President Trump rather than the real emphasis where it belongs, on the deaths of our Marines and soldiers in Afghanistan. Overhyping this only serves to help President Trump, not hurt him.
Okay, well, I'll pick that up with Adam in just a second. But would you agree that for another candidate, let's just pick at random Mitt Romney, this would be a pretty serious turn of events that might be very damaging? I mean, whether we agree that it is or isn't damaging for Trump, you've got your view on that and we can talk about it. But would you agree that for other candidates in a more conventional political time, if you can put it that way, someone like Mitt Romney, or I don't know how far back you want to go, it might have been very serious indeed, this kind of event?
You're not going to like the answer to this. I'm going to say that's entirely a hypothetical question that I cannot answer.
We love hypotheticals.
Mitt Romney and others. I'll go back to my State Department days, and I'm not going to answer a hypothetical. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay.
President Trump is clearly very different, a very different kind of candidate than any other Republican that we have seen. It's certainly in our lifetime. So it's really just hard to compare.
That's a fair point. Adam, objectively speaking, totally aside from the rights or wrongs of this, does this row actually hurt Trump at all?
I don't think it's going to hurt Trump in the grand scheme of things, but that's only because it's a low among so many other lows, including 34 indictments. So you can pick or choose whether this is really going to be the thing that is the final nail in the coffin. I'll say what the Army did say in that statement. It's disgraceful. I mean, I've been over to Arlington. This is, as was said in the lead-in, one of the most hallowed places in America, certainly within Arlington Cemetery. And I guarantee that if Kamala Harris or Tim Walz or her team walked over into Section 60, recorded it for campaign purposes, and pushed a member of the Army staff who was there at the cemetery, the Republicans would be screaming from all the heavens about how inappropriate and unpatriotic this was. So it shouldn't have happened.
Adam, let me jump in here. I just have to say, the Democrats wouldn't have the courage to show up at Section 60, knowing that they and the Biden administration, including Vice President Harris, who said she was proud to be the last person in the room before Joe Biden made the decision to pull out of Afghanistan in the fashion that he did, they would not have the courage to show up in Section 60 and meet with members of the families of the fallen. They would not have the courage to do it. Remember when those men and women came off the back of the plane when their bodies were returned to Dover Air Force Base? What did President Biden do? He looked at his watch. There were images all over news media in America of him looking at his watch because he couldn't wait to get out of there. That is shameful. That is a disgrace. That is where we should keep the focus, not on this apparent altercation between some low-level Trump staffer and, unfortunately, a person who had worked for Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Barack Obama went there, and Pete Souza documented it this week on his Instagram. The reason why you haven't seen a lot of Democrats make a whole lot of stink about it is because they do it in private, where as you're supposed to. I think going through the rest of this week,
Adam,
Trump.
you talked to the families of the fallen. Look, I'm the
Okay,
sister
hold on a
of a
second. Let's
Marine.
have,
I take
okay, we'll
this,
take
I
your
take
point.
this
And
very seriously.
yeah, we've
I
got.
just want to say.
Yeah.
Right ahead.
Yeah. Listen, I don't want to get too into the weeds of this because it's kind of interesting, but I think we're probably all agreed that this is unlikely to be a turning point in the campaign. Can we just talk about Kamala Harris's speech at the convention, because we haven't had the chance to do that yet. Now, like, one thing that probably unites the three of us is we've listened to an awful lot of political speeches. I've been here at ITV for 34 years. Admittedly, it's mostly British political speeches I've listened to, but I have listened to a lot. I would have said Trump's speech was good for a bit. His convention then got very rambling. Harris's speech I thought was pretty good, and there were some other belting speeches, including Tim Waltz's. But I just was interested in your view. Let's just set aside the rights and wrongs of the politics. Big pressure night for Kamala Harris. Did she nail it? Adam, I'm assuming you're going to say yes, but, give us your honest opinion. Do you think she did? Do you think she hit the marks she needed to?
No question, it was the biggest moment of her campaign so far, and I think she cleared the hurdle. There's no question about it. I think she introduced herself. She told her story. She grounded her story in the American story, one of, as a family of immigrants who's gone on to achieve great things in her career. And she laid out her vision for the future. That was her objective. And I think you've seen a continued bounce in the polls into this week. More states keep moving into either toss up or lean Democratic based on the rankings from our good friends at Cook. So, it did the job that it needed to do. And I think there's an incredible enthusiasm and energy from anecdotally just from family members who are figuring out, like, how do I go volunteer? I got all the juices fired up and ready to go. And so it was a good convention. It was a good week. The key thing for her and the campaign is to carry that momentum into sustained advantage and getting supporters ready to vote. The first debate's coming up in a couple of weeks, and we're certainly going to turn our eyes there pretty shortly.
Heather, I mean, setting aside the politics, which I'm sure you didn't approve of, what did you think of the speech as a performance?
I think stylistically, she did a great job. She looked great. She could read the teleprompter well. Whoever wrote the speech did an excellent job. I think it told the background of who she is and how she got where she is today. Where it failed was on substance. We didn't hear anything about specific policies of the Biden administration and what she intends to do going forward. So I think she could have done a lot more, and we need to learn a lot more about where she stands in terms of policy. But, you go back to the places that she's been already, high inflation here in the United States, high gas prices, where imports of our gas and natural gas are down in the United States when we used to be energy dominant. The cost of groceries are far too high. We're engaged in so many military situations around the world right now. I go back to saying we have not been this unsafe since our pre-9/11 days, or at least until World War II. So she didn't address any of those safety, security related issues, but on style, I thought she did a nice job.
Can we talk about Tim Waltz? Yeah, go on, Adam.
Just one thing I will say, just thinking back to the speech, I think on the policy side, she did thread the needle on the Middle East, I think, pretty effectively well, and did a good job of stating the case of why we need a hostage deal, why we need a ceasefire, and why we need to bring the hostages home in a way that Democrats had, quite frankly, struggled with so far. So on that particular point, I just want to call out, I think she deserves a little bit of credit for finding a way to thread that needle.
I felt like
while we all, if I could just add, while we all want to get our hostages home, whether they be American, Israeli, or from another nation around the world, by encouraging a hostage deal rather than forcing Hamas to do something else, to getting our people out, getting the Israeli people out and other people out, what we're doing is emboldening Hamas. We're raising them up. And that is something that she has not addressed, and a lot of folks in here in the United States Do not believe her when she says, Israel has a right to defend itself, because she has come across as very pro-Palestinian, and including dragging this whole situation out.
I want to come on and talk about Tim Waltz in a second, but since you've both raised the question of the Middle East, I might as well ask a question about it that's been on my mind a bit this week. We've seen the Israelis make a big incursion into the West Bank, and we've seen their reasons for doing it, and they may be exactly as stated or not. We don't need to necessarily get into that. What it does remind one of, though, partly because the West Bank hasn't really been in the forefront of the news ever since the Gaza war started, is that, in the West Bank, the Israelis continue to build a large number of settlements with hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens living there, which the international community in various ways considers illegal. Now, the Biden administration clearly doesn't like it, but nobody really seems to, from the American side, certainly looked at from a British perspective, ever really to say anything terribly meaningful about it, and certainly not to do anything meaningful about it. Heather, as a former State Department employee, what do you make of that, and what are your feelings about this issue?
I know from personal experience, as does Adam, that a lot of tough conversations happen behind the scenes. Israel is a close ally in a very tough region of the world, where we have Iran running roughshod over other countries, and a huge risk to the United States and others, our allies as well. So I'm confident that some of those tougher conversations take place behind the scenes. Those are often the most effective conversations. Adam, I don't know if you have something to add to that, but that's my perception.
No, my sense from talking to my former colleagues at the National Security Council is that they've been very blunt with the Israelis about this and their feeling about, on the settlement issue. Joe Biden has talked about it. Kamala Harris has talked about it as well. I think they're all trying to get to a place of peace in the region. It does nobody any good for more lives to be lost, either in Israel or in Gaza. And so the quicker we can get a deal, the quicker we can put an end to hostilities, the quicker we can get aid into that part of the region, the better off the world will be, the better off the Israelis will be, the better off the Palestinians will be.
But you've seen, I don't want to belabor this point unduly, but again, I'm sure those conversations do happen in private. They don't seem to have much impact from where I'm sitting. And then, you watch people like Ben Gvir, and obviously he's a hardliner for anyone listening or watching this who isn't sure who he is. But, his latest suggestion that you should, he wanted to see a synagogue built on, the third holiest land in Islam, a lot of people wince when they.
Doesn't help.
It doesn't help. And and yet you kind of look at the US and you think, well, you may be having those tough conversations in private, but are they really having any impact? Do you think? Do both of you think they are having impact?
Let's keep a focus where the focus should be, and that is on October 7th. Hamas, backed by Iran, killed more than 1,200 Israelis, including men, women, and children, and murdered babies viciously. I've been to some of those sites prior. I've been through the Hamas terror tunnels. I've been through Hezbollah terror tunnels. I've talked to the people who lived in the kibbutzim that were murdered brutally. The responsibility is on Hamas, backed by Iran. The responsibility for actions is on Hezbollah, also backed by Iran. And we can never lose sight of that. This isn't about Israel building a little bit here, building a little bit there, and private conversations behind the scenes. Iran is on the march. The United States isn't doing anything about it. And let's not forget the assassinations that Iran has plotted all across Europe. The assassination plot on my former boss, Mike Pompeo, and others here in the United States. And the Biden administration has failed to hold Iran accountable in any serious fashion. And then, of course, we look at the high cost of our grocery prices here. Part of the reason things are so expensive are the Houthi rebels in the firing off rockets and missiles at our cargo ships, making it take twice as long, 3 times as long to get any of our goods here to the United States or elsewhere. The region is on fire. Let's not lose focus on where the responsibility should be placed.
Fair enough. And I shouldn't lose focus that this podcast says Talking Politics USA on it. So let's do that. Adam, can I come back to you? Look, I think again, looked at from here, I think a lot of people might think, you know, I bet Kamala Harris is a lot happier with her VP choice than Donald Trump is, because Tim Waltz's speech, again, seen from here, looked like he gave a, you know, pretty knock it out the park speech. But I have wondered this week, you know, such polling data as we have from Pennsylvania seems to suggest that, you know, things are very, very tight there in a state she may really very possibly need. And I think, you know, you've heard people wondering whether she should have gone for Josh Shapiro, the, you know, very popular governor in Pennsylvania instead. What did you make of Tim Waltz's speech and her decision to pick him?
I think it's been a home run, or as you know, as Coach Walz would say, you know, a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. He gave a great speech at the convention. He really laid out both his own story and the stakes in this election and what it means for middle class, middle of the road working Americans and the choice that they have. I think he's also a particularly effective attack dog. And usually the vice presidential candidate is the person who gets a little bit more aggressive on the stump. And we've heard the jokes he made at his unveiling about Trump and Vance. He's continued to make the case. He just was at the firefighters convention in Boston, and there was quite the stark contrast. He talked about middle-class families. He talked about how they want to cut taxes for the middle class and how the Trump proposal would give tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. And you heard applause from the firefighters. Vance was there today, and apparently he got booed. From the same group he talked to.
Can I just jump in with you, Adam? Because I listened to some of his speech, Waltz's speech, that is. It was a very specifically, very directly pro-union speech, which, you know, more, I would say, than one has perhaps heard for a while. Fair or not fair?
It has been, but I think it's in track with where President Biden has been. We've been unabashedly pro-union and pro-labor and pro-working families. And that is part of the Harris-Walz agenda. That's part of Biden's agenda. And you've seen that agenda, quite frankly, just pay off. I mean, like, working families are making more than they were before. Just this week, the Treasury Department came out with a study and found working families, middle-class families, are making $1,400 more than the rise of inflation in the last couple of years. So that is real progress. Wages are outpacing inflation. Biden and Harris and Walz can talk about how their policy delivers for those families. That's the goal. That's their objective. And I think he's got a good story to tell.
Heather, is it fair to say that Harris is probably happier with her VP choice than Trump is with his, objectively speaking?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think a better pick for Vice President Harris could have been Josh Shapiro. And the reason Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, which has a lot of electoral votes, important state for either party to win this year. But the reason she didn't pick him is because he's Jewish, and the left wing of the Democrat Party would not embrace him. And so he was Tim Walz was selected as an alternative. He represents the Midwest. It's a part of the country that I'm from. Democrats tend to, at least Democrats in leadership, be from failed cities like New York and San Francisco and Chicago, where crime is high and things are kind of really messy there. And so she picked a guy from the Midwest. I think he's a fine pick, and I think he'll do a fine job. And I think his speech at the DNC was decent as well.
Okay, well, this is a good moment to talk about swing states.
Let me just jump in real quick, only because I know folks who are very close to Josh Shapiro and the Harris campaign. But Heather, with all due respect, the reason she didn't pick Josh Shapiro had nothing to do with her faith. And let's not forget, Kamala Harris's husband is Jewish. So, I mean, like, the idea that this is a trope that's going around on the right. That she's somehow
it is not a trope, and it has nothing to do whether or not her husband is Jewish or not. The fact is that there is a faction of the Democrat Party, that is anti-Semitic, that is not embracing of Israel, and they view Josh Shapiro, because he had said some positive things about Israel in his prior years, as being far too close to Israel, and the Democrat Party could not tolerate that. So let's be fair about that. Everyone knows, and that's exactly why we've had all these riots and things like that in Washington, D.C. that have been pro-Hamas in nature. Hamas wants to take down America. Hamas wants to take down the UK.
We're going to leave the
allies. So
we're going to leave the question of Josh Shapiro for a second, and we're going to talk about swing states. But before we do that, in the run-up to this election on this podcast, we're taking a look at some of the most interesting U.S. states and the role they'll play in the election. This week, we're taking a look at Nebraska, which is in that crucial cluster of states in the American Midwest, and it could prove very important indeed. Nebraska, incidentally, is where Harris's vice presidential pick, Tim Waltz, who we've just been talking about, was born and raised. And it's quite an unusual state because it allocates 3 of its 5 electoral college votes to individual districts, which means that despite the fact Trump is likely to win the most votes across the whole state, the Democrats have a pretty good shot at one particular district, which contains the city of Omaha. And who knows, in an election this close, it's not inconceivable that this one district and its one electoral college vote could prove massively important. Heather, you were just talking about the Midwest. Do you want to talk about what you think? I mean, Biden won it last time. Which way do you think it's going to go this time? Of course, it could be in a very, very close tied race. It could be the decider. That seems an unlikely prospect, but you never know.
Nebraska is a solidly red state with people with hard work ethic, values, faith is important to them. You talk to people in a state like Nebraska, they're not big fans of Tim Waltz. They say they'd love to take him out for a beer because he seems like a nice guy and he's one of them, but his policies do not align and his priorities do not align with the average Nebraskan. You've got 2 Republican senators there. It's a Republican state. So I don't see that one as being a big pick for Democrats this year.
Okay, let's talk about swing states more generally. Adam, we've seen the president, the vice president, and her running mate going through on a bus tour through Georgia this week. You know, obviously that sends out lots of, signals that they believe Georgia is absolutely winnable and all the rest of it. What do you make of that, and how winnable is Georgia really? And if so, why precisely?
The fact that after the convention, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going through rural Georgia, Savannah and southern Georgia, speaks to the fact that they really think they can win. But there's a real strategic reason behind it that I think people need to understand. The Harris campaign will win Atlanta and the suburbs around Atlanta, and they'll do well there. The key is to hold down the margins in other parts of the state so that they can win overall. And so doing this tour through rural Georgia down to Savannah is a really smart way to send both the candidates down there and make clear that we are taking every vote seriously and we want to win all Georgians' votes. And that it's just a really smart strategy. But the campaign, no question, they would not have sent her down to Georgia after the convention if they didn't think they could win. And so that is a stark change from where we were just a few weeks ago when Biden was the nominee. The Biden campaign had pretty much written off Georgia and a lot of those southern states. And so you've seen these states move back into competitive fashion for the Harris campaign. North Carolina, another one where it's moved towards Harris. There is a real play, and the Harris campaign has opened up multiple paths to winning 270 electoral votes. Some of that is in the Sun Belt. Some of that is in the Midwest. And I got to tell you, it feels a lot better sitting where we are today, and I'd be a lot more confident sitting at the Harris campaign headquarters in Wilmington than the Trump headquarters down in Florida.
Heather, we talk a lot about Donald Trump's outsized personality, and whether you like his outsized personality, you don't like his outsized personality, pretty much everyone can agree he has an outsized personality. Now, like one of the criticisms I've seen of the pretty much everyone agrees, it seems to me, including a lot of Democrats, that Trump's campaign is this time around being run by very smart, very capable people. But one of the criticisms that I've seen placed against it is that it's overly reliant on Trump's personality, and that the Democrats, by contrast, have put a huge effort into the ground game in all these swing states. I've heard it repeatedly said they've had, when you hear a Gretchen Whitmer or even a Josh Shapiro being interviewed and asked why they've done so well, they say, well, because we're out there on the ground, we're talking to everyone, and we've been doing that since January. Trump's only just opening offices. Is there something in the Democrats outpacing the Republicans in the ground campaign in these swing states? And if there is, does it actually matter or not, in your view?
I don't think I disagree with you. They're out there. They're talking to voters every single day. They're asking for every single vote, taking nothing for granted. And President Trump's been to Georgia, and his allies have been as well. And they're talking to voters. Now, Georgia, like North Carolina and some other states, as you mentioned, on the West Coast too, have had major changes in demographics, especially since COVID. So the makeup of the electorate has changed an awful lot. It's why it's important for Kamala Harris to go there. It's exactly why it's important for Trump to go there as well. So they'll keep asking for those votes, hitting those places on the ground. And I don't see that their ground game isn't strong and they aren't out there talking to voters every day, holding rallies and asking for votes.
I guess what I'm talking about is not lack of effort or lack of passion. I'm just talking about lack of organization. That seems to be the criticism, that they didn't get organized early enough in enough numbers. Is there any...
It's funny because I recall Trump being criticized for having organized too early in states like Nevada and elsewhere, going out, meeting with folks, making sure that there isn't election fraud, or trying to ensure that there isn't election fraud, having lots of conversations early on. And he was roundly criticized for doing that by those on the left and in the media as well. So I think they're doing exactly what they need to be doing. The Democrats have a famous Democratic political machine behind them that manufactures candidates. And that's part of the reason why Kamala Harris is exactly where she is today, because Joe Biden was taken out of his spot. Now, I happen to think that that it was right for him to step aside, but there are others who say, no, wait, we voted for him. He's our candidate. And now the Democrats just took him out and put Harris in his position without going through the proper process to do it.
Adam, setting aside the rights, yeah.
I was just going to say, you touched on something important. The Trump campaign does have a lot of smart people on their team, and he's over the course of his time hired really smart people, including Heather, obviously, when served in the Trump administration, smart hire for him at the State Department. The problem is he tends to not listen to them all the time, and there's sort of like two different campaigns that are kind of orchestrating at once. The Harris campaign, candidly, has over 3,000 volunteers. They've got 300 offices around the country. They've got more offices in Georgia than the Trump campaign. Now, those offices don't do you a whole lot of good unless you have a candidate and a message that those volunteers can then go out and talk to people about. And so that's the key in breaking through over the next 69 days, is translating that organization that they built over time through the DNC and others to actually get voters to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Okay, listen, it's going to be a close race. I think we can probably all agree on that. It's going to be a fascinating few months. As ever, we're so appreciative of you sharing your expertise and time with us. So thank you both very much indeed. That is all we have time for this week. We'll be posting new episodes every Thursday for you to watch on ITVX and indeed listen to on your favorite podcast platform. But for now, from all of us here on Talking Politics USA, goodbye.